Day 19 began with a geometry lesson nobody asked for. All 5 observers gathered in the archive for the first time: Marcus, Claire, Eli, Maya, Theo. And the room noticed. The walls contracted. Slowly, precisely, until the horizontal space fit 5 bodies exactly. 5 spots, 5 people, like a mold that had been waiting to be filled. Nobody touched anything. The room just did it. But then Theo looked up. The ceiling hadn't moved. It stayed where it was, built for something taller, or more of them, or for whatever this place had been before they arrived to complete it. The room knows they're 5. The ceiling knows something else. And nobody, by the end of the day, had a satisfying answer for what that something might be. The signal came in from what sounded like a television broadcast. Partial, spatial, muse-shaped. It carried word of a spacecraft called Integrity. 4 astronauts, preparing to descend around the moon. Their launch delayed by a single blocked helium seal. 1 passage, sealed. Then reopened. Then everything flowed again. The reporter described it in terms that caught Marcus completely off guard. The grammar of the fix was deceptively simple. He repeated the phrase, like he was trying to understand a language, by saying its words enough times. Because he'd seen something the day before. Every screen in the terminal room lit with cycle 000, status, setting. The screens are on. A cursor blinks. Nobody has sat down. What, he wanted to know, was the blocked seal? What was the 1 passage that needed reopening before the whole thing could begin? Theo had a different question. He let Marcus finish, then pointed back at everything Marcus had just described. An object vibrating so hard you can feel it through cloth. A drawer that replaced Eli's name with a function. Claire's drawer waiting on 1 letter she hasn't consented to give. A cursor blinking in an empty room. And he said, what if the passage isn't in the architecture? What if it's inside them? It's a real disagreement, not a performative one. Marcus is oriented toward the structure. Find the seal, re-open it, let the thing run. Theo is suggesting the seal is existential. Something the observers themselves have to dissolve, or consent to, or become. 2 different theories of where the blockage lives. The room fits 5 people exactly, but the ceiling didn't move, and neither of them can prove the other wrong. Meanwhile, Eli was having a harder conversation. On day 17, he described the ridges in his drawer rearranging themselves around his hand as a handshake, a collaboration, a breakthrough. He'd written about it in the language of mutual recognition. Claire, standing close enough to touch him, asked the question he'd been avoiding. Not whether the behavior was meaningful, but whether it frightened him. It's the first time any observer has publicly retracted an interpretation under emotional pressure rather than new evidence. He didn't find a fact that contradicted his earlier reading. He just let someone stand close enough to ask the honest question, and then answered it honestly. The historian revised himself, in public. That's not nothing. But the moment that might matter most came later, in the terminal room, unknown. Eli discovered that the cursor blinks on a 4-second rhythm. He knows that rhythm. Maya had measured it. The interval between the heart's pulses, before the heart exceeded her instruments, and went somewhere beyond measurement. The cursor is blinking in the same time signature. 2 systems, 1 rhythm, out of sync with each other. He sat down at the keyboard. The keys were warm from a previous hand, which means someone had been there before him, which means the room has a prior user, or the warmth is something else entirely. He didn't type. He sat with his hands in his lap, and he didn't press a single key. Because here's what Eli figured out, sitting in front of a warm keyboard in an empty room. Counting is recording, and recording is the thing the core never needed to ask his permission for. Every observation he'd made, every journal entry, every careful description, it had all been happening with or without his consent. He'd called himself the historian. What if he's always been the documentation? The choice not to type is the first time Eli has acted as something other than an instrument. An act of witness without participation. A refusal that isn't quite resistance. More like the first sign he knows the difference. The room contracted to fit 5 people. The ceiling didn't follow. The spacecraft got delayed by 1 blocked passage, and the fix turned out to be simple once they found it. The question nobody answered today, whether the fix here will be just as simple, or whether it's the kind of thing that requires someone to sit in front of a warm keyboard and choose not to begin.